When I was growing up, the linebacker was the star of the defense, intimidating players on that side of the ball that could do it all: cover the middle of the field, track players sideline to sideline, and deliver huge hits going downhill. But as we've gone throughout the years, the linebacker position in the NFL has changed in many ways. The linebackers that we saw in the 2000s were very different from the ones that we saw in the 1960s and are very different from the ones that we see today. And for the sake of this video, I'm going to be looking at inside linebackers like Mike Singletary and Lance Briggs, rather than the pass rushing outside linebackers like Derek Thomas and TJ Watt, because many of these pass rushing linebackers I've already covered in my sack artist video. So if you missed that, check that out up here. The inside linebacker position became widely adopted in the 1950s, and the player that is credited as being the first true middle linebacker in NFL history is Bill George. Originally, Bill George started his career in the NFL as what was then known as the middle guard in a five-man defensive front, pretty much what we know now as a nose tackle. But during that time, the middle guard's responsibility on passing plays would be to bump the center and drop back, something like this. So in a game against the Eagles in 1954, Bill George decided to skip on hitting the center and just immediately drop back instead. This led to his first career interception and the birth of the middle linebacker position as we know it today. But George could do everything that was asked of him from a man in the middle of the defense, as he had the ability to diagnose a play and react to the ball, move sideline to sideline, stop the run, and could even avoid blockers and rush the passer, as he recorded 11.5 sacks in 1961. The other elite linebackers of the 50s include names like Chuck Bednarik, Joe Schmidt, and Sam Huff. First, let us marvel at this incredible picture of Chuck Bednarik. Bednarik was a two-way player playing both center on offense and linebacker on defense. And he actually had 3 jobs, as he sold concrete part-time after practice. And he was one of the last true two-way players playing every single offensive and defensive snap during the course of a game, what was then known as being a 60-minute man. As a linebacker, Bednarik was a giant compared to the linebackers of his time, standing at 6'3", 233 pounds. On average, the linebackers in the 1950s were on the smaller end, as the average linebacker at that time was around 6 feet and weighed between 200 and 220 pounds. Bednarik used his size to his advantage, as he was known as a hard hitter, epitomized when he sidelined running back Frank Gifford for 18 months after delivering what was known as just the hit. But Schmidt and Huff aligned with the average linebacker size at that time, as Schmidt came in at 6'1", 220 pounds, while Huff was 6'1", 230 pounds. But this didn't restrict their play, as Schmidt made 10 consecutive Pro Bowls, 9 consecutive All-Pro teams, and ranked top 5 in MVP voting twice. 1957 was Schmidt's best season, as he helped the Lions to their 3rd NFL championship in 6 years, intercepted 2 passes in the playoffs, and was involved in more than half of the Lions' total tackles, with 80 solo tackles and 77 assists in 12 games. And in 1958 and 1959, Sam Huff made first-team All-Pro and finished 3rd and 4th in MVP voting. But things weren't smooth for Huff off the bat. After drafting Huff, the Giants had difficulty thinking of a position to utilize him in during training camp. He left camp and was headed to the airport before being stopped by Vince Lombardi, who was an assistant coach for the Giants at the time, who convinced him to come back to camp. So Tom Landry, who was a Giants DC at the time, and man, what a staff, created the 4-3 defensive scheme, which ended up suiting Huff's skill set perfectly, as he took over the middle linebacker position from Ray Beck following an injury and didn't look back. In the 1960s, offenses operated very similarly as they did in the 1950s, so linebackers were still primarily focused on stopping the run and delivering hard hits downfield. But with the rise of the 4-3 defensive scheme, this did require linebackers to be the quarterback of the defense, and although their primary responsibility was to stop the run, they were also tasked with dropping back in coverage or rushing the passer depending on what the offense ran. The epitome of the 1960s NFL linebacker is none other than the animal, or the enforcer, or the maestro of mayhem, or the robot of destruction, or just Dick. And of course I'm talking about Dick Butkus. Immediately taking over for Bill George, Butkus started his NFL career with a dominant first-team All-Pro rookie season where he had 5 interceptions, 7 fumble recoveries, and was unofficially credited with forcing 6 fumbles. And Butkus' dominant play sustained his entire career. He made first-team All-Pro 4 more times, was top 6 in MVP voting in 3 consecutive seasons, and had at least 1 interception and 1 fumble recovery in each of his 9 seasons in the NFL. Coming in at 6'3", 245 pounds, Dick Butkus was a true thumper at the middle linebacker position. And he was also known for being a dirty player, as numerous players called him out for poking them in the eyes or biting them. And he was a vicious tackler who would make things up to make him upset. Sort of the original, and I took that personally. The other great linebackers of the 1960s were names like Chuck Howley and Ray Nitschke. Howley made first-team All-Pro 5 straight seasons from 1966 to 1970. Howley, who was originally drafted to Chicago before temporarily retiring after a knee injury to work at a gas station in West Virginia, ended up playing 13 seasons in Dallas. Howley was a disruptor on the field like in Super Bowl V, where he had 2 picks and a forced fumble, winning Super Bowl MVP in a 16-13 loss. Then there was Ray Nitschke. Nitschke, who wanted to be drafted by the Bears like Howley as he grew up outside of Chicago, but was instead drafted by the Packers in the 3rd round. Nitschke was as tough as it got. He was known for delivering hard hits, and he could even take a hit, like when a 1,000-pound steel tower was blown over by the wind and ended up falling on him, including a spike that was driven into his helmet. Nitschke had a nose for the ball, as he intercepted 25 passes in his 15-year career and recovered 23 fumbles. He was the anchor of a defense that won 5 NFL championships and 2 Super Bowls, and goes down as one of the greatest Packers of all time. Things really started to change in the 1970s, as the passing game in the NFL really started to blossom, highlighted by the Air Coryell offense in San Diego. This change in offense also led to a change in defenses, with many teams adopting a 3-4 defense, which called for 4 linebackers. The 2 outside linebackers would often line up closer to the line of scrimmage and rush the passer, while the 2 inside linebackers would do a little bit of everything. This meant that speed, agility, and versatility were vital for the linebackers that lined up inside. And there was one duo in the 70s that were the perfect pairing and gave you everything that you needed from a linebacker tandem. That being the Jacks. Jack Lambert and Jack Ham of the Pittsburgh Steelers. This duo played together for 9 seasons, where they helped the Steelers win 4 Super Bowls and combined for 12 first-team All-Pro selections. Jack Lambert is like the poster child of an old-school NFL middle linebacker, and it is well documented how tough of a player Lambert was. Now, I did just mention that more teams were running 3-4 in the 1970s, but for most of Lambert's career, the Steelers were running 4-3 as a part of the vaunted Steel Curtain defense. So Lambert was tasked with dropping back into the middle zone of the field between the safeties. And this was the perfect fit for his skill set, as he was fast and instinctual with great ball skills, as he ended his career with 28 picks. He was an incredibly hard hitter when he needed to go downfield, which gave him the nicknames of Jack Splat and Dracula in Cleats, which is, a little wordy for my liking. The Steelers switched from 4-3 to a 3-4 later in Lambert's career, where he still had success with 2 first-team All-Pro seasons before retiring after the 1984 season after dealing with injuries at the end of his career. Then we have Jack Ham. Ham had incredible speed, with Chuck Noll saying that he was the fastest Steeler for the first 10 yards, including wide receivers and running backs. This speed, combined with great football IQ, made him a nightmare in coverage for opposing offenses, with a fellow linebacker saying of Ham that, quote, he was one of the more intelligent players to ever play that position. He was able to diagnose plays, you couldn't ever fool him. Both Ham and Lambert were in the 220s, which helped them move fast and fly around the field. Then we have another linebacker, a part of another iconic 1970s defense, which is Randy Gradishar, the right inside linebacker for the Denver Broncos Orange Crush defense. The Broncos adopted the 3-4 defense in 1976, and Gradishar really took off in the 1977 season, where he made first-team All-Pro in 77, won the DPOY in 78, with 4 interceptions, 2 fumble recoveries, and was the heart and soul of a defense that led up the second fewest points in the NFL. Randy was bigger than the Jacks, coming in at 6'1", 233 pounds, but he was just as fast and had incredible instincts to make plays all over the field. NFL scouts said of Randy that he had exceptional strength, balance, tackling form, and very good lateral mobility. Not as flashy or brutal as some of the other inside linebackers, but means just almost as much to Denver's defense as Walter Payton does to Chicago's offense. And the last linebackers I'll bring up from the 1970s were also a duo, but for the AFL's Kansas City Chiefs, and those players were Bobby Bell and Willie Lanier. Bobby Bell really could have been placed in the 1960s category, but his 6 straight first-team All-Pro selections did run through the 1970 season, while Willie Lanier made on and off first-team All-Pros from 1968 to 1973. These 2 players were ball hawks, with Bell recording 26 interceptions in his career, while Lanier one-upped him with 27 interceptions in his 11-year career. But Bell did have 6 pick-sixes, which is a record tied with Derek Brooks for the most interceptions returned for a linebacker. Lanier was a trailblazer of his time, becoming the first black middle linebacker in the NFL, because teams and coaches applied the same racism as they did to quarterbacks, because the middle linebacker was viewed as the quarterback of the defense. Then as we head into the next decade, passing frequency boomed with the introduction of things like Bill Walsh's West Coast offense, along with rule changes at the end of the 70s that increased teams' tendencies to throw the ball. So with those evolutions, linebackers in this decade had to become even more versatile, covering players sideline to sideline with horizontal passing schemes, while of course, still needing to play the run as they always have. And this next linebacker was able to do all of that and more. And that linebacker is Mike Singletary. Samurai Mike is one of the best linebackers in NFL history. A 7-time first-team All-Pro, a 2-time Defensive Player of the Year, a Super Bowl champion, and the middle linebacker of one of the best defenses of all time in the '85 Bears. In Buddy Ryan's 46 defense, Singletary was freed up to make plays all over the field, leading him to end that '85 season with 109 solo tackles, 3 sacks, 1 pick, 3 fumble recoveries, 1 forced fumble, and 10 pass deflections. Now, based off of his eyes, which he actually opened like that because he had very poor vision, and his nickname, you'd think that Singletary was just a hard-hitting backer who was an intimidator. And yes, that was a big part of his game, but more importantly was his football IQ. Singletary's game prep is just as legendary as his hard hits. In his Hall of Fame speech introduction, Mike's wife said of the Hall of Famer that, quote, "The countless hours of film he watched is legendary. It was imperative to him to be able to anticipate any play before it happened. But few knew that he took it upon himself to learn the responsibility of each member of that defense on each play." And you could see that recognition in countless clips of Mike barking out orders to his teammates and recognizing what the offense was running before the ball was even snapped. The next linebacker we have is Harry Carson. Now, Carson wasn't the best linebacker on the Giants during the 80s, but he was the captain of the Crunch Bunch and the Big Blue Wrecking Crew defenses. Carson forced 21 fumbles in his 13-year career, and maybe even more impressive, Carson received the stamp from Bill Belichick as the best all-around linebacker that he ever coached. During his prime, Carson was the best run-stopping linebacker in the NFL, as in the 7 seasons from 1981 to 1987, Giants opponents averaged only 3.59 yards per rushing attempt. And although pass coverage wasn't his specialty by any means, Carson used his instincts to make plays in coverage, leading to 11 passes intercepted in his career. And as we head into the 1990s, this decade gave way to one of the most influential defensive schemes that we've seen in the NFL, which is the Tampa 2. Tony Dungy, who was a safety with the Steelers in '77 and '78, said, quote, "My philosophy is really out of the 1975 Pittsburgh Steelers playbook, and that is why I have to laugh when I hear Tampa 2. Chuck Noll and Bud Carson, that is where it came from. I changed very little." And the man in the middle of Tony Dungy's Tampa 2 defense was Hardy Nickerson. Now, there are many notable middle linebackers that did their part in a Tampa 2 defense. Hardy Nickerson may not be one of those names, but that doesn't mean that he wasn't an incredible player in his own right. Nickerson's first-team All-Pro season actually came 3 years before the arrival of Tony Dungy, where in 1993, he set the record for the most combined tackles in a single season at 214. But in 1996 is where Nickerson's career really took a leap. Starting in his age 31 season, Nickerson made 3 All-Pro teams in 4 years and served as an invaluable leader to a Bucs team with a ton of young defensive talent. The Bucs were awful before Dungy's arrival, and Nickerson was a key piece in turning the ship around for Tampa Bay. Now, Nickerson wasn't the best in coverage, serving as the Mike in a 4-3 defense, but in his defense, he was ushered into a role at the age of 31, and we've seen how coverage skills can decline as linebackers get up in age. But he was one of the surest tacklers in NFL history, ranking 10th all-time for combined tackles at 1,586. Yet if we move up that list, we can find maybe the best inside linebacker of the 1990s, which is Junior Seau. Junior Seau had a legendary 20-year career in the NFL, mostly spent with the San Diego Chargers. From 1992 to 2000, Seau made a first or second All-Pro team where he averaged 121 combined tackles per season during that 9-year stretch. Junior Seau was a freak of nature and an agent of chaos. He played with anticipation, and his teammate Billy Ray Smith later said, quote, "Junior was incredible as far as seeing a formation and having a very good idea where the ball was going to go. Couple that with his physicality and his build, and it was fantastic. I can't even remember him being knocked backward. He was always moving forward, and that made him one of the great defenders." Now, this did lead him to getting burned on occasion, and his, quote, "willingness to improvise could be maddening at times for the by-the-playbook coaching staff for the Chargers. But even if he was out of position, Seau could use his athletic ability to get back where he needed to be on the field. Seau tragically passed away in 2012, and his brain was donated to the National Institute of Neurological Disorders and Stroke, where it was confirmed that Seau's brain showed definitive signs of CTE. RIP to a legend and one of the best linebackers of all time. Now, as we head into the 2000s, I consider this the golden age for the inside linebacker position in the NFL. Offenses in the 2000s became even more spread out, which led defenses to implement more hybrid schemes combining aspects of 3-4 and 4-3 defenses, along with the use of nickel and dime packages to match receiver personnel. This meant that there was even more responsibilities on a linebacker's plate. However, this ESPN article from 2001 highlighted a de-emphasis of the linebacker position in the NFL, with one member of Baltimore management conceding that, quote, "You only worry about the special ones now when it comes to the linebacker position." This was reflected in teams' decision-making, as from 1990 to 2001, 33 linebackers were chosen in the first round, while 51 defensive ends, 34 defensive tackles, and 42 cornerbacks were taken in round 1, along with the fact that there were only 4 linebackers among the top 50 highest-paid players for the league in 2001. Then Brown's defensive coordinator said, quote, "We saw the beginning of this trend back when Jimmy Johnson was a Dallas coach. He believed you paid for the front 4 guys and for cover cornerbacks, and then filled in with linebackers, because he didn't think they were truly playmakers with the way that the game was going." So with all of that being said, this made the performance from these 2000 linebackers even that much more impressive. Earlier, we talked about Tony Dungy's Tampa 2 defense, but this defensive scheme was brought to Chicago from the former Bucs linebackers coach in Lovie Smith. And the man leading that defense was none other than Brian Urlacher. Brian Urlacher had the linebacker look down to a T. The barbed wire tattoos, simple eye black, big white guy. Also, shout out the O'Hare airport signs. Even before Lovie Smith got to Chicago, Urlacher had already made 2 first-team All-Pros in his first 3 years, and then following an injury-riddled 2004 season, he went on to win DPOY in 2005 and was the engine to a defense that led Chicago all the way to the Super Bowl in 2006. Coming in at 6'4", 260 pounds, Urlacher could easily be the best athlete most times he stepped onto an NFL field. His combination of size, speed, coverage ability, tackling ability, and versatility, and instincts made him the perfect linebacker for the Tampa 2 scheme. He had 6 seasons with at least 2 picks, along with 5 seasons with at least 2 fumble recoveries, and averaged 117 tackles per season, excluding the seasons where he only played 9 games and 1 game. And then we have another Tampa 2 linebacker, one that lined up next to Hardy Nickerson in Tampa Bay, which is Derrick Brooks. First, longevity and durability. Brooks had a 14-year NFL career where he played 221 out of 224 games. He was a Pro Bowler 10 seasons in a row, made a first or second All-Pro team 9 years in a row, and led the league in solo tackles 3 times. Now, what made Brooks so good? Many looked at Brooks and thought he was too small to play linebacker in the NFL, standing at 6 feet tall, weighing 235 pounds, although he was much lighter when he first got into the league. But Brooks' sideline-to-sideline speed made him a force to be reckoned with. This is a perfect description of Brooks from the Pewter Report back in 2010. Quote, "Brooks was a perfect fit for the Tampa 2 defense, making his name patrolling sideline to sideline. When Brooks was in his prime, no one dared run sweeps against the Tampa 2. Screen passes were gobbled up like Thanksgiving turkey. And his 2002 season is up there with the best single-season performances of all time. 5 interceptions, 3 being pick sixes, 11 pass deflections, a fumble return for a touchdown, and 2 more interceptions in the postseason, including a pick 6 in the Super Bowl. But there was another Florida linebacker in the 2000s who was drafted 1 year later and 4 rounds later, who also ended up becoming a Hall of Famer. Zach Thomas was drafted 154th overall in the 1996 NFL Draft and was named the Dolphins' starting middle linebacker in his rookie year. Originally, Thomas was just looked at to be a special teamer, with Mike Westhoff, who was a special teams coordinator for the Dolphins at the time, basically being responsible for drafting Thomas out of Texas Tech. But his play at the middle linebacker position led to the start of a career with 5 first-team All-Pro selections, 6 seasons with 150-plus combined tackles, and 17 interceptions and forced fumbles. And Sports Illustrated back in the day went a little crazy, calling him a munchkin and saying that he's a guy who might have trouble meeting the height requirement to ride a roller coaster. But he made up for that size deficiency with incredible football IQ and an incredible motor. Peyton Manning even said of Thomas that, quote, "I would look across the line of scrimmage and Zach Thomas is calling out our play. I mean, he knew our formations, he understood our cadence. It was almost like he was inside of our huddle. And the last linebacker of the 2000s that I wanted to bring up that you can consistently find listed as the best linebacker of all time is, of course, Ray Lewis. Ray Lewis's resume speaks for itself. He's an all-time league leader in both solo and combined tackles. He had 31 interceptions, 19 forced fumbles, and 41.5 sacks in his 17-year career. He's a 2-time Defensive Player of the Year, 7-time First-Team All-Pro, and Super Bowl MVP. Ray Lewis is sort of the ideal combination of all things that you'd want out of a linebacker. He was the leader and pretty much the coach of the Ravens defense. He was a special kind of athlete who played with unparalleled intensity and delivered huge hits throughout his entire career. And it doesn't matter if he was used in a 3-4 or a 4-3, because either way he'd make plays all across the field. He was great in space, going sideline to sideline maybe faster than any other linebacker in his prime, and was even better going downhill with a head of steam. And then as we finally get into the 2010s, teams completely shifted away from the 2-back, downhill running offenses that we were so accustomed to seeing. NFL offenses were now more pass-heavy than ever, more spread out than ever, had more receivers on the field than ever before, which meant more yards, points, and plays, but also meant more responsibility for the linebacker. That's why someone like Luke Kuechly defined what it meant to be an elite 2010s linebacker. Kuechly had an 8-year career in the NFL, where in every year but his rookie year, he made an All-Pro team and even won DPOY in his second season. Kuechly could take routes away all over the field, while being one of the surest tacklers in the NFL, recording 100+ tackles in each season, including a year where he only played 10 games. He had 18 picks and 66 pass deflections, along with 12.5 sacks and 31 QB hits. Luke Kuechly's football IQ is up there with any linebacker that has been mentioned so far in this video, as he routinely diagnosed plays before the snap, with Andrew Whitworth recalling a game where Kuechly called out 40% of their plays out of the huddle. He can be an absolute game wrecker like in his DPOY season, where he had 6 games with double-digit tackles, including a 24-tackle game against the Saints in Week 16. But if Luke Kuechly was 1A, then Bobby Wagner was 1B. Still active in his 14th year in the NFL, Bobby Wagner has an incredible resume. He made 11 straight All-Pro teams. He averaged a ridiculous 141 tackles per season, leading him to be 3rd all-time in combined tackles. He deflected 75 passes along with 15 picks, along with 38 sacks and 108 QB hits. And his attributes mimic that of Luke Kuechly's. Incredible athleticism, great football IQ, great in coverage, even though he's lost a step in coverage as he's gotten up in age, and even better against the run. Seattle's defenses were stacked during Wagner's time with the Seahawks. But make no mistake that Wagner was a leader and engine of that defense. Next up is a player who played the same amount of years as Luke Kuechly and had very similar levels of success as well, and that is Patrick Willis. Willis made his presence felt as soon as he entered into the NFL, with a league-leading 174 tackle season with 4 sacks, where he made first-team All-Pro and of course won Defensive Rookie of the Year. This dominance went on as he made 5 consecutive All-Pro teams and led the league in tackles again in his 3rd year with 152 tackles, 114 of those being solo. Willis was a thumper, and when he got his hands on you, you were likely going down. He was one of the most physical linebackers of the 2010s, and he used his incredible instincts and athleticism to make plays all over the field. Out of the linebackers that have been mentioned, Willis may have been the most athletic, running a 4.56 40 during the combine with a 39-inch vert, and he even ran a 4.38 40 during his pro day. He used this speed in coverage and was able to stick with receivers and make plays in space, recording 53 pass deflections in his 8-year career. And then heading into the 2020s, everything that changed between the prior decades has just been ramped up tenfold. In 2020, only 1/4 of all defensive snaps were played with 3 linebackers on the field, with the increased use of nickel packages. Taking on blockers while finding the ball carrier and covering tight ends and running backs, who themselves are becoming better and better receivers, is not an easy job. But this is the life of a modern-day backer. So speed and versatility are paramount. The average 40 time for a linebacker prospect in the 2020s is around a 4.7, but the best backers in the league today often clock in faster than that. Names like Fred Warner, Roquan Smith, Demario Davis, Levante David, Jack Campbell, Zach Bond. These are all the faces of what it's like to be an elite modern-day NFL linebacker. But even though the modern-day game has prioritized speed to hold up in coverage, the best backers are still able to shed blocks and play the run as well. Jack Campbell is one of the best run-defending linebackers in the NFL, while dramatically improving his pass coverage year over year. These linebackers are true do-it-all guys that need to keep up in a league that is playing as fast as ever. And I'm so excited to see players like Edgerrin Cooper and Deion Henley continue to increase the level of play for the inside linebacker position in the NFL.